the Superscope Storyteller presents Alice's Adventures Through the Looking Glass.
Queen Alice. Alice sat on the soft grass, taking a brief rest from her long journey and trying to gather her thoughts. It seemed as though she had been in Looking Glass Land all her life because of her many experiences here. But it had only been a few days since she magically stepped through a large mirror in her home and found herself in this strange, enchanted land. It was a curious place, divided into chessboard-like squares, and all of the people who lived here were part of the game. Alice thought over the promise the Red Queen had given her.
I've been a pawn in the chess game, moving from square to square. But I know that if I reach the last square, I will become queen. Oh, that will be wonderful. Queen Alice.
Her daydreams were interrupted by the sudden approach of the White King.
Could you help me? I've lost my messengers.
I might be able to. What are their names?
It seems to have slipped my mind at the moment. Well, anyway, maybe you could look down the road and tell me if you see either of them.
I see nobody on the road.
Oh, yes, nobody, is it? My, what strong eyes you have, little girl, to be able to see nobody, and at that distance, too.
Alice was about to explain to the king that she could not see anyone when a rabbit dressed in a messenger suit came hopping up the road and stopped in front of the king.
Why, hello! What's your name again?
At this moment, the messenger had a sudden urge to sneeze.
Well, achoo! Tell me, did you pass the other messenger on the road?
I saw nobody, Your Majesty.
Good. That means that nobody should come along any minute now. And meanwhile, achoo, what do you have for me in your message bag?
The rabbit reached into his satchel and pulled out a notepad and a ham sandwich. The king was very pleased. He grabbed the pad and quickly consumed it. Then he opened the ham sandwich and began to read it like a book.
Ketchup, mayonnaise, mustard, lettuce, tomato, ham and cheese on rye. Tell me, achoo, what do you make of this?
It means there's trouble in town. They're in a pickle, and that's no baloney. The lion and the unicorn are having a big fight, Your Highness.
Fighting over the crown again, I suppose? Well, that should be quite a sight. Let's all run into town and watch.
So, the three of them hurried in the direction of the town. When they arrived, they saw a large crowd cheering as the lion and the unicorn fought. They were kicking up a cloud of dust, and it was difficult to tell who was winning. Suddenly, the fight stopped, and the lion held up his paw to get everyone's attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break.
The crowd began to boo, and the lion tried to be reassuring as he continued to speak.
Now don't go away. We'll be right back after a few quick bites of some delicious plum cake. Right, unicorn?
Right. Say, little girl, why don't you bring us some cake?
Alice ran to the bakery wagon and grabbed a huge plum cake, along with a knife to cut it with. Then she returned to the lion and the unicorn, who were sitting exhausted on the ground. When she tried to cut the cake, the pieces would strangely grow back together again. The unicorn became very impatient.
I guess you've never managed a looking glass cake before. Hand it around first and cut it afterward.
This sounded ridiculous to Alice, but she did as the unicorn said, and as she passed the plum cake around, she watched in amazement as it divided itself into perfect sections. The lion was the first to take a bite.
It's a sharp cake indeed that can cut itself into pieces, don't you think?
Before Alice could answer, they were interrupted by a loud noise. It was the townspeople, who had picked up drums, pots, and pans and were angrily pounding them because the lion and the unicorn had stopped the fight. The two beasts covered their ears and were so frightened that they took off into the forest. Alice ran after them. She was rushing through the wooded area when she stopped and gasped with fright at the sight of a knight dressed in crimson armor. He raised his club in the air.
Ahoy! Ahoy! Check!
He quickly galloped up to Alice. Just as he reached her, his horse suddenly stopped, and he tumbled to the ground.
You're my prisoner!
He climbed back upon his horse and was about to repeat himself when a voice from off in the distance interrupted him.
Ahoy! Ahoy! Check!
It was the White Knight. In no time at all, he reached them and came off his horse in much the same fashion as the Red Knight. After picking himself up off the ground, he mounted his horse, and the two knights quietly stared at each other. Finally, the Red Knight broke the silence.
She's my prisoner, you know. That's true, but I came and rescued her. Well then, according to the rules of knighthood, I think we're supposed to fight for her.
The two knights put on their large helmets and began banging away at each other with such fury that Alice hid behind a tree and watched the battle. It was a very curious fight indeed, because of the manner in which they fought. They held their clubs by wrapping their arms around them, and whenever one would swing and miss, he would fall to the ground on his head. The conflict finally ended with both of them falling down and landing side by side. When they got up, they shook hands. Then the Red Knight climbed on his horse and galloped away. The White Knight removed his helmet and walked over to Alice.
It was a glorious victory, wasn't it?
Well, I'm afraid I wasn't a very good audience. I was thinking of something else and completely lost interest in the fight.
What could possibly be more important than my victory?
You see, I've been promised that I can become queen if I reach the last square, and I have thought about little else since I've been here. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?
Well, yes, of course. As a matter of fact, I happen to know that you only have the next brook to cross before reaching your goal.
Really?
You have my word. I'll see you there safely. Then I must return because it will be the end of my move.
As the White Knight climbed back into the saddle, Alice noticed something strange about his horse.
Why is your horse wearing anklets on his legs, Mr. Knight?
It's as obvious as the nose on your face, to keep the sharks from biting his feet.
But there aren't any sharks here.
You see? The bracelets work perfectly. I thought them up myself. It's a remarkable invention, isn't it?
Before Alice could answer, the knight fell from his horse again. Alice ran to his side and helped him up.
Are you hurt?
Not at all. I'll just climb back on, and we'll forget this even happened.
They proceeded on their journey, but they did not get far when the knight fell off once again. This happened so often that Alice began to question whether he could ride at all. But she did not want to hurt his feelings, so she said nothing. Finally, they came to the edge of the forest, and the White Knight spoke to her.
Well, this is where we part. Do you see that stream up ahead?
Yes.
All you need to do is jump over it, and you'll be a queen. But you will stay and see me off first, won't you?
Of course. It's the least I could do for you.
That's good. Now just wait and wave your handkerchief when I get to that turn in the road. I think it'll encourage me.
So they shook hands, and the knight rode slowly away into the forest. Before he had gone very far, Alice watched him fall to the ground.
There he goes again, right on his head. I wonder if he will ever learn to ride properly.
He fell several more times, first on one side and then on the other. finally he reached the turn, and Alice waved to him. As he disappeared out of sight, Alice hoped that he had been encouraged. She turned to look at the stream. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. She ran as fast as she could and leaped across the water. Upon landing, Alice felt something heavy on her head. She reached up and discovered that she was wearing a solid gold crown. She felt very majestic and decided that she should practice walking like a queen. Alice held herself in a grand manner, and as she turned around, she was shocked to find herself standing in front of a huge castle. Above the entrance was a sign which read, "Welcome, Queen Alice." After brushing herself off, she stood up and slowly opened the door. Much to her surprise, there sat a whole hall full of people and creatures of every kind, waiting for her. The Red Queen was seated at the head of the table. She motioned to Alice.
"Please be seated, child. There, that's better. You seem to be a wee bit shy. Let me introduce you to everyone. First, I'd like you to meet the roast. Alice, roast. Roast, Alice."
Alice was amazed when the roast stood up in the dish and gave a little bow. She picked up a fork and carving knife.
What a delicious-looking piece of meat. Would you care for a slice, Your Majesty?
"Certainly not. It isn't proper to cut someone to whom you've just been introduced. Servants, take away the roast and bring some plum pudding."
The servants quickly disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a large bowl of pudding, placing it on the table before Alice.
Please don't introduce me to the pudding, or we won't get anything to eat.
"Hush, child. Alice, pudding. Pudding, Alice. Take away the pudding. Well, that was a lovely meal. Now we shall all drink to Alice's health."
To Alice's health!
Then Alice watched in disbelief as a wild free-for-all broke out among the guests. Many of them climbed on top of the table, poured their drinks on their heads, and caught the liquid with their tongues as it trickled down their faces. Others began to throw chairs around the room and toss food at one another. Alice tried to make them behave.
Stop this! Stop it at once! Where are your manners?
Alice ducked under the table just in time to avoid being hit by a handful of mashed potatoes. She crawled back up on the other side and found herself sitting next to the Red Queen, who was laughing at her. Alice quickly seized her by the shoulders and began to shake her.
Make them stop, please!
To her surprise, the Queen began shrinking smaller and smaller, and the room started to spin around, slowly at first, and then faster, until everything was a total blur. Alice continued to shake the Queen, who was growing smaller and fatter and softer.
I'll shake you into a kitten, I will! Why, you are a kitten.
Alice blinked her eyes and realized that she had been shaking her poor, confused Kitty all this time. To Kitty, this was just another one of those peculiar, unexplained things about humans. Whatever had prompted Alice's strange behavior would soon be forgotten, replaced by a gentle kiss and a saucer of warm milk. But to Alice, the dream of her adventures through the looking-glass would always be among her most cherished possessions and would never be forgotten.